the bench is empty, just unnecessary.
Yeah. That's not good. This is bad.
Oh, this is bad.
This is
no good. Oh, this is terrible.
There are going to be ramifications for this going forward.
And it's just no point to it.
The opposite of good.
It's very bad.
Bad. Thing bad. John Shambi, Fran Fraschilla on the call on ESPN2 last night in the Big 12 as a tough scene at the end of the Sunflower Showdown, which I did not know this game was called, between Kansas and Kansas State. The Jayhawks took an 81-60 victory, but all the focus obviously on a brawl that spilled into the stands as the game prominently involving Kansas's Silvio De Sousa. In this one, lots to be sorted out with this one as the Big 12 will levy some punishment. What do you want me to do?
No, I'm just checking on you, all right?
Listen.
You're sitting in your dad's seat. Next thing you know, you're going to do a hip-hop.
The hip-hop. In more pleasant news, two names going to be enshrined in Cooperstown, New York, is Derek Jeter and Larry Walker, both inducted into Major League Baseball's Hall of Fame on Tuesday. Jeter's first year on the ballot, he missed becoming the second unanimous selection by a single vote. Would have been able to join his teammate in Mariano Rivera in that. We are still on the hunt for that vote. And back to the hardwood, the NBA fans around the world rejoice. His number one overall pick, Zion Williamson, is set to make his debut for the Pelicans against the Spurs. Williamson had knee surgery in October after averaging 23 points on 71% shooting in the preseason and has been sidelined ever since. That is SportsCenter, brought to you by Straight Talk Wireless. Straight Talk Wireless runs on the same 4G LTE networks for up to half the cost. Get the unlimited plan with up to 25 gigs of high-speed data, then 2G for just $45 a month. No contract. Straight Talk Wireless, only at Walmart.
Derek Jeter, elected to the Hall of Fame.
He's lived a charmed life. Everything has pretty much gone his way.
When you're one of the four greatest of all time at your position, that's how you get in.
Jeter named on 396 of 397 ballots.
Is he going to care that much that he didn't get one vote out of 397? He's in the same Hall of Fame. He's still going to Cooperstown.
Ball pit. Golic and Wingo, ESPN Radio, ESPN News, presented by Progressive Insurance. All phone guests join us on the Shell Pencil Performance Line. Mike Golic Jr., Trey Wingo here with you in studio. The inimitable force that is Mike Golic is in Cleveland as he gets set to host the Cleveland Sports Awards. And now you can sit down, relax. It's all good. We'll get to you in a minute. He's in Cleveland, and we'll look forward to hearing from him. We're also delighted to be joined right now by a guy who is the perfect guy to talk to this morning. Our senior Major League Baseball insider, Buster Olney, joining us on the Shell Pennzoil Performance Line with the new Shell V-Power Nitro Plus Premium Gasoline, engineered with 4 levels of defense against gunk, wear, corrosion, and friction. Buster, listen, it's great to talk to you, and yes, it is certainly a talking point that Derek Jeter did not get a unanimous selection into the Hall of Fame. He fell one voter short, and we'll have that discussion. But at the end of the day, we should be talking about just how incredibly talented Derek Jeter was and what Larry Walker's induction means. Let's start first with Derek Jeter. Obviously, he was getting in. Are you surprised that he was one vote short?
I am surprised because I can't wrap my head around the idea that you wouldn't put him on the ballot, especially now because we've basically moved past that log jam that clogged the ballot for 5 to 8 years with all the steroid-era candidates, Mark McGwire, Barry Bonds, Roger Clemens, complicating issues. We've gone beyond that. And so the rationale of, well, you know what, I wanted to use that spot that I might have used on Jeter for somebody else, that to me is kind of gone away. And if you look at his playing career, only 5 hitters in the history of Major League Baseball had more hits than Derek Jeter. Only 10 players in the history of Major League Baseball scored more runs than Derek. And then you get to the postseason, which for him was a regular season, 158 games, 200 hits, 111 runs. And my feeling is about Clemens and Bonds. I think they should be in the Hall of Fame, but it's clear that the character clause has been weaponized by a lot of voters. And if it's going to potentially be a negative that'll be a disqualifier, then it should be a positive for various candidates. And Derek Jeter represented the sport so well during his career, so I can't figure out why you wouldn't vote for Jeter.
And Buster, we've seen a lot of clamoring, especially on Twitter, for people saying this one voter who left Jeter off the ballot needs to come forward. Do you think that especially someone who votes like this has an obligation to come forward and explain their position?
100%. And look, we still don't know who didn't vote for Ken Griffey Jr. You know, the handful, I think it was 3 who didn't vote for him. I don't understand that. You know, the Hall of Fame, and I've had discussions with Hall of Fame officials about this, they don't have voter transparency because out of respect for the Baseball Writers Association. In other words, their position is, look, we're asking these people to vote. We don't want to have anything that, is done where they're made to feel uncomfortable. So I understand it from their perspective. I do think that the Baseball Writers Association would be well served to basically go to the Hall of Fame and say, look, if we're going to do this, there needs to be transparency because, my goodness, journalists, the idea that you wouldn't reveal your vote is antithetical to what they do for a living. You'd want transparency. You want accountability. And you know what? If somebody's uncomfortable because of the scrutiny that they get, don't vote. That's part of the process. If you're going to be in the business of helping to make the news, of determining who the Hall of Famer is in each year, then you should certainly be in a position where you need to explain why you voted, why you did.
Right, Buster, that's look, I'm not going to say this is terrible for Derek Jeter and awful and all this kind of stuff, but it seems sort of, like you said, we've moved past this, right? Once we lanced the boil, for lack of a better term, okay, someone got in unanimously, so you don't have to do that anymore because no one else did, which, by the way, the first argument they tell you in law school, because that's the way it's always been done, is the weakest argument you can make, so don't ever do that. But we've moved past that now, so I'm trying to figure out what could possibly be the justification for a guy who, as you said, is going to be one of the great, and Tim Kirkton said it as well, probably one of the best 4 at his position of all time in his postseason, which was basically a regular season. He played in so many postseason games. He hit 300, had 200 hits, had an amazing on-base percentage. I just trying to figure out the justification for doing it, and I can't find it.
No, I'm with you. And look, yesterday, engaging with fellow folks on Twitter, you got back a lot of, well, you know what, if Willie Mays wasn't unanimous, if Hank Aaron wasn't unanimous, if Babe Ruth wasn't unanimous, then Derek Jeter's certainly not worthy of being unanimous. And my response to that is, so wait, because, 50 years ago, 40 years ago, some writer had a knuckleheaded decision, and let's be real about it, in some cases, probably racist, then all voters who follow are locked into that stupid precedent? No. The question, I think, the way I look at it is you sit down as a voter, you have the ballot in front of you, you have a decision whether or not to say Derek Jeter is a Hall of Famer or not, and I'm like you, Trey, I can't come up with a rationale. Okay, he wasn't the greatest player of all time. He may not have been the second greatest player of all time. Of course he was a Hall of Famer.
Talking to Buster Olney with us, our ESPN Major League Baseball insider on the Shell Pennzoil Performance Line. Buster, looking forward now, I know you mentioned that you believe Bonds and Clemens should be Hall of Famers. They got just over 60% of the vote in this, their 8th year on the ballot, so 2 more tries. Next year looking like it could be a thinner class potentially. Is there any hope at this point, or was this year an indication that it's time to let that die?
Yeah, and the needle has barely moved for those 2 guys. It's clear that there's a block, 35 to close to 40% of voters who are saying we are not going to vote these 2 into the Hall of Fame. It makes me shake my head every year because you guys know and I know without knowing exactly who, and I've had this conversation with a lot of players, we know that there are people in the Hall of Fame who've used performance-enhancing drugs. And I really feel like what happened with Bonds and Clemens is that they're basically being held to account for the sins of their entire generation. There were thousands of players, major leaguers, minor leaguers, who used performance-enhancing drugs at that time, and these 2 have sort of been plucked out of the pack and held out, and the fact that their numbers are not moving tells you that there's no indication that in the next 2 years they're going to reach 75% from where they are now, 60, 61% to where they need to get to. That is a Mount Everest of sentiment to overcome, and I don't think they'll do it.
Yeah, Buster Olney with us this morning. And, Buster, that's the problem I have about this because you can't tell the story of baseball and what it meant to generations without the names Barry Bonds or Roger Clemens. I mean, if he's going to be in the record book, I'm talking about Barry Bonds right now, as the all-time home run leader, and he is. If he's in there, it seems ridiculous that the place that is essentially a museum for the history of the game, that he would be left out and Roger Clemens would be left out, right? I mean, you can't tell the story of the game without whether you like it or not is irrelevant, because you can't tell the story without what these guys were able to do.
Context. You know, these were the two best players of the generation, which, let's face it, was saturated with PEDs because of, actions by the folks who used it and inaction by so many other people within the sport. And whether you like it or not, that's what the sport was. And I feel like this retroactive morality has been ridiculous, but it continues.
And that's the other thing that sort of leads me, and we'll get through all this because I have another question about someone who's going to be on the ballot in a couple of years. But I think we should sort of acknowledge, oh, by the way, Larry Walker also got in. And for people that want to take criticism of him because he played at Coors Field and all that kind of stuff, you're not really understanding who Larry Walker was as a player.
That's exactly right. A player so respected in the game because of how well-rounded he was. He hit for power. He played defense. He could run the bases. And it was the coolest moment of last night to see that video of him taking the call from Jack O'Connell, the head of the baseball writers, secretary of the baseball writers, and what it meant to him. To see the emotion in him and how cool is it going to be for him to be able to share a drink with all those other Hall of Famers in the back porch at the Otisauga next summer. That'll be fun.
Buster, you have any idea why he was wearing SpongeBob clothes?
I have no idea.
I was hoping, I was going to say, I was relying on your status as a baseball insider. I was happy, but a bit confused on that one. So we will move on and let that shirt also be enshrined with him in Cooperstown. We're talking to Buster Olney, host of the Baseball Tonight podcast. New episode out today that you can certainly check out. Buster, some of the other news, obviously, around Major League Baseball as we talk about steroids, impropriety. We certainly know what's going on with the sign-stealing scandal. What are your thoughts? Astros owner Jim Crane saying that his players will apologize in this instance.
Well, and it's not surprising that they've addressed that because, my goodness, there was so much sentiment over the weekend when the Astros had their Fan Fest and Jose Altuve, Alex Bregman, met with reporters and basically didn't address the issue and didn't apologize. And folks with other teams are like, what are they doing? Like, come out and show some remorse. Say mistakes were made or something. Give us something. And so there's been a lot of backlash within the sport because, let's face it, this is not going away. At the first day of spring training, you're going to have dopes like me who are going to be coming up to them with microphones and tell us, about the sign-stealing scandal. What do you think about what happened? And that during the course of the year, day after day after day, they're going to have to come face-to-face, eye-to-eye with peers who they basically cheated, like, stealing money in a neighborhood poker game and have to explain themselves.
And Buster, to that end, we've had the conversation on this show that this is going to be a topic that bleeds over into areas that baseball likely doesn't want it to. What do you think the likelihood is of Major League Baseball actually reopening or taking a look at this and administering punishment to some of these players in a way that it was hesitant to do before?
I don't think they'll do that because it's so complicated. Any fight like that with the union would be so protracted and so complicated. I just don't think they're going to go down that road. And we heard from Major League Baseball last week that, we looked into the evidence of the buzzers and we couldn't find any. And so I think that they're absolutely trying to slam the door shut and move forward.
So I guess the curious question I have there: how hard did they actually look, right? Because it's right because we have conflicting points of view there, right? Well, we look, but we want to move on from this as quickly as possible, and then baseball Twitter was drunk for 3 days last week over this, with so many players coming out and saying this. I guess my question would be: I think the Astros management, on some level, Major League Baseball wants this to go away. I don't think any Major League player wants it to go away in any way, shape, or form that wasn't part of that Astros organization.
No, and it's why back in 2017, I really feel like that Rob Manfred made a mistake by not coming down with the hammer on the Red Sox-Yankee Apple Watch thing and basically declare to everybody and anticipate a moment like this when people would be kicked out of the game for a year and just said, look, if you engage in this conduct, we're going to kick you out of the game for a significant period of time because now – because that didn't happen, because the cheating persisted, what I hate about this is that now everyone wonders, well, was that real? Was that game real? Was that game fixed? Did one team have an advantage over the other? That's the conversation that I wish that baseball had anticipated when they dealt with this a few years ago.
And they did not, and it continues to go on. And I can't wait to see, like you said, what those – I mean, because, like you said, you're going to be one of hundreds of people that are going to be sticking microphones in the Astros' faces, and I don't think those people are going to be like, oh, yeah, we've moved on. That won't cut it. So be prepared for the onslaught, I would say, for all the Astros players when they show up, because you're going to have to deal with this much more than you did at that fan fest over the weekend in Houston. Buster, as always, we appreciate the perspective. You can catch the Baseball Tonight podcast, new episode out today. We appreciate your time, buddy. Thanks.
Yep. See you guys.
It's going to be interesting, man.
It's going to be extremely interesting to watch that play out in real time because, again, as Buster said, having to not only face the members of the media, but the players that you slighted that we've already heard from. That's the point we brought up is these guys have gotten on their horse quick to mount up and say, man, you have robbed people of jobs, their livelihood. Right. You have affected the way guys' careers are going to go about and all this. And that's not something, especially pitchers, I'd imagine, are going to be content to take laying down. Yeah, and Mike, we heard from Mike Clevenger, the Indians pitcher, while he was getting a tattoo, which is just the most Clevenger thing of all time. That was dope. Basically saying, look, there are real-world ramifications. And I wonder if the Astros actually understand the real-world ramifications that may be facing when they start playing games.
Oh, listen, they don't care what those ramifications are for others, or you wouldn't cheat in the first place. And if they get a few pitches thrown at them, what do they care? They had some World Series ring. They succeeded in what they were doing, right? I mean, it's like a guy that's using PEDs. You're using them. You know they're wrong. You're using them to either further your stats or, as most of them are, get that big contract. So once you get that big contract, you succeeded. If you get caught, you may feel bad that people are going to look at you a little differently. But what you tried to achieve by doing this, you did. And Houston did. And that's why I've been saying all along, and Buster just said it as well, I don't think baseball can do anymore or will try and do anymore from the baseball side. Now, what you're saying, Trey, the players, that could be a different thing. But I also agree with Buster. I think Rob Manfred had the opportunity a couple years ago with the Apple Watch situation to lay it down on some players and let players know there's going to be some ramifications. But basically what we've heard from baseball is we know players are guilty. We know players are involved in this, but it's going to be too hard to punish them, so we'll punish some others. I mean, all the players got to be going, this is great. I mean, my God, we got away with it, and nothing's happening to us. And I don't think they're going to go back and try and do anything either. So Manfred, as Buster said, had the opportunity a couple years ago to discipline players and let them know what the ramifications would be, and he didn't do it. It's like a parent failing to discipline their kid. We talk about pitchers potentially playing beanball and all of this. Right. And what if we said every time something like that pops up and a suspension happens and a pitcher gets 5 days, so he essentially gets to miss 1 game for that? Well, if you're Major League Baseball, you don't seem all that concerned and severely punishing enough to actually get this out of the game. Absolutely. And then there's the other part of this, which I find somewhat hilarious. Not only are they non-apologetic, some of the Astros have been indignant. Hey, man, we still won that thing. Blah, blah. Yeah, but you wouldn't have done it if you didn't think it was helping you, right? Can we just be clear? You don't do this just flippantly. You do it for a reason because you think it works for you. So you can say, yeah, we won it, but don't pretend like doing that wasn't a big part of why you were able to win it. Yeah, that part, again, reeks as obvious in this whole situation. So, man, spring training is going to be a show in that one. And Buster hinted at it there. He's everyone knows what their job is going to be at spring training, and it is going to be going directly to these guys and asking all of those questions. Right. And then there's the issue of Mike Fiers. And we had our teammate Jess Mendoza on. And when we had her on the show, we asked her, and Mike, you phrased the question specifically as a former player, how do you feel about what Mike Fiers did? And she was honest with us, and people got really upset with her about that. But to be fair to her, it was asked in the terms of, as a former player, how would you feel about someone going outside the code? And people went crazy. And as we pointed out at the beginning of the interview, we know that Jessica is a special advisor to the Mets. We acknowledge that like we do every time she comes on. But people looked at that because obviously what was going on with Carlos Beltran at the time there and her opinion, and had very strong feelings about it. Exactly. So Pedro Martinez, who obviously does work for the MLB Network, but is also a special assistant to the Boston Red Sox, had this to say about
how Mike Fiers broke this story and how it came out.
So do you have a problem with Fiers being eventually the whistleblower to start this entire investigation?
You know what? If he was to do it when he was playing for the Houston Astros, I would say Mike Fiers has guts. But to go and do it after you leave the Houston Astros because they don't have you anymore, that doesn't show me anything. I mean, you're just a bad teammate.
Okay, that was on WEEI. So, all these people that had their fangs out.
Light the torches.
Light them up. I mean, I'm not here for selective outrage, okay? You can't be mad at one person for doing one thing and then not mad at somebody else. So if you felt one way about Jess, if you don't feel the same way about this, then you're not being honest with anybody.
I did a light search of Pedro Martinez's name on Twitter, and let's just say the results were not the same as what Jess dealt with that same day. So keep that same energy.
Right, Mike? If you're going to come at somebody, you got to come at everybody if that's your line in the sand.
Oh, yeah. You can't have selective outrage in this in this whole situation. And as, we have kind of said all along, as Mike and I said, we wouldn't have done this. Certainly players do it. I did bring up that point as well, and I know Jess took a lot of heat for it, and you're right about Pedro should as well if those people feel the same way of why didn't he do it if he was that outraged by it? Why didn't he say something when he was with the Astros? Why did he wait till he left and wasn't reaping the benefits of it as well? But I'm with you on the selective outrage. I mean, let's be fair across the board here if you're going to be mad at somebody.
Because that's the one thing. I guess it's one thing for, Dad to have an opinion or me or anyone who works here to have an opinion, but so many people took umbrage with the fact that, well, she is also an employee of the Mets. Like, literally every box that she checks is checked by Pedro in this instance.
There's only one thing that's different.
Yeah.
I'll let you figure out what the one thing that's different, because everything else, literally everything else is the same. And if you feel differently about it, that says a lot more about you than it does about anybody else. And that's something that that's as straight talk as we can get in terms of this situation.
Yeah. So an interesting wrinkle to all of this, to say the least. But I don't know. So it's interesting. By the way, if I misspoke, someone just tweeted it was Pedro Martinez, not Pedro Gomez. I don't know if me or someone else misspoke in that. But
I did not hear anybody say Pedro Gomez, but if we did, to our teammate and friend,
yeah,
we certainly apologize. It was absolutely not Pedro Gomez. Yeah. It was Pedro Martinez. So listen, I'm just curious. I'm going to gauge the room. We'll gauge the temperature of the room in the social media sphere and see how that plays out. Obviously, social media is going to try and do their thing to find out who that one writer is that didn't vote for Derek Jeter. That's not going away either.
You know what? And in all seriousness, you've been talking about that "Don't Bleep with Cats" documentary, where the internet, we see this all the time. They go to work finding it, and sometimes the consequences are kind of scary. There is part of me as a human that's like, maybe just, if the guy wants to come out and defend it, that's great. But if he doesn't, maybe just don't hunt him down and ruin his life. Over one vote for Derek Jeter, that seems like a weird. Let's not do that either. We can live in the middle ground.
It's not the greatest disservice in the history of the world. It's just curious.
Yes.
That's all it is. Coming up, we knew we were going to be talking about the Hall of Fame today. We did not know we were talking about one of the biggest brawls we've ever seen in college basketball. We'll get to that when we come back.